This is a sea otter. 40 pounds. Dense fur. The thickest of any mammal on Earth. Nearly 1 million hairs per square inch. It holds hands with its pups while they sleep, so the current does not carry them apart. It wraps itself in kelp at night like a blanket. It floats on its back, cracks open urchins on its chest, and watches the California sky. It is, by almost any measure, one of the most endearing animals alive, and its disappearance came within a few decades of collapsing the entire Pacific coastline of the United States. Not metaphorically, not gradually. Collapsed. Fisheries gone. Ecosystems stripped. Coastlines destabilized. Fishing communities destroyed. Because one 40-pound animal was no longer in the water. This is not a story about a cute endangered species. This is a story about how ecosystems actually work. About a hidden architecture most people never see until it falls apart.
Here is what happened when the sea otter disappeared, and what is still being rebuilt today. To understand what was lost, you have to understand what was there. Before the fur hunters arrived, before the 19th century reshaped this coastline, the waters off California, Oregon, Washington, and Alaska contained something extraordinary. Kelp forests, underwater canopies of giant algae growing 60, sometimes 90 feet tall from the seafloor to the surface, swaying in the current, filtering the light into cathedral columns of green and gold. These were not just beautiful, they were among the most productive ecosystems on Earth. More species per square meter than a tropical rainforest. Rockfish, lingcod, cabezon, sheephead. Dozens of invertebrates, crustaceans, juvenile fish using the kelp as nursery, as shelter, as food. And moving through all of it, the sea otter. Estimates put the historic population at between 150,000 and 300,000 animals. From the Aleutian Islands of Alaska, down through British Columbia, Washington, Oregon, and all the way to Baja California. They were everywhere. They had been everywhere for millions of years. The otters kept the forests alive. That is the key fact. That is the thing that, once you understand it, makes everything that followed make sense. They ate the urchins, constantly, voraciously, up to 25% of their own body weight every single day. And that, it turns out, was the only thing standing between the kelp and total destruction. In 1741, a Russian expedition led by Vitus Bering reached the Aleutian Islands. Among everything the crew brought back to Russia, the pelts of sea otters. What happened next moved fast. Sea otter fur is unlike anything else. Nearly 1 million hairs per square inch, no other mammal comes close. In the courts of Imperial China, a single pelt was worth more than a skilled laborer earned in a year. Russian, British, and American traders understood immediately what they had found. The hunt began. For the next 150 years, hunters swept the Pacific coast systematically. Russian promishlenniki, American maritime traders. They moved south, region by region, taking every animal they could find. When the otters were gone from one stretch of coast, they moved to the next. By the time the International Fur Seal Treaty was signed in 1911, the first international wildlife protection agreement in history, the damage was nearly total. 300,000 sea otters had become fewer than 2,000. Some estimates put the number as low as 1,000. Scattered in isolated pockets, barely a remnant. The hunters moved on. The kelp forest did not know yet what was coming, because the connection between the otter and the kelp and everything in between had not been made yet. That would take another 50 years, and the graduate student with a question that seemed almost too simple to bother asking. In the early 1960s, a young ecologist named James Estes arrived at Amchitka Island in the Aleutians to study sea otters. He had a simple question: what do otters actually do in an ecosystem? To answer it, he needed a comparison, a place with otters and a place without them. He found one. Shemya Island, 50 miles away, had no otters. The hunters had taken them all decades earlier. What Estes found on Shemya changed the field of ecology. No kelp, almost none. Instead, urchins. Hundreds of thousands of sea urchins covering the seafloor in every direction, as far as he could see, grazing constantly, moving slowly across the rock, consuming everything. What ecologists now call an urchin barren, flat, stripped, almost devoid of life. On Amchitka, where otters remained, the kelp was lush, tall, and full of fish. Here is the mechanism. A single sea otter eats roughly 10,000 sea urchins per year. Remove the otters, remove that predation pressure, and the urchin population has nothing to check it. It explodes. And urchins, when they are not being eaten, do one thing. They eat kelp. Roots first. They move through a forest like a slow fire, consuming everything from the bottom up. A 100-mile kelp forest can be functionally destroyed in a few years. When the kelp goes, everything goes with it. The rockfish lose their nursery. The lingcod lose their shelter. The invertebrates lose their food source. Commercial fisheries, built over generations, collapse without warning. Fishing communities along the California and Oregon coast watched their catches fall and did not understand why. The sea urchin, the 40-pound otter, the entire Pacific coast. One chain, every link connected. James Estes published his findings in 1974. The paper introduced a concept that would reshape how ecologists think about nature: the trophic cascade. The idea is this. In most ecosystems, predators do not just eat prey, they structure the entire system below them. Remove the predator, and the effects cascade down through every level of the food web, all the way to the plants, all the way to the soil and the seafloor. The sea otter is now one of the most studied examples of a keystone species in the world. A keystone, like the stone at the top of an arch. Remove it, and the arch falls. Not because the keystone was the largest or the strongest piece, but because everything else was organized around it. But there is another dimension to the otter story that researchers did not fully understand until recently: carbon. Kelp forests are extraordinary carbon sinks. Giant kelp grows faster than almost any plant on Earth, up to 2 feet per day under the right conditions. As it grows, it absorbs carbon dioxide. When it dies and sinks to the seafloor, it carries that carbon with it, sequestering it for decades or centuries. A 2012 study found that kelp forests in areas with healthy otter populations store up to 12 times more carbon than those without. 12 times. Simply because the otters kept the urchins in check, kept the kelp alive, kept the carbon cycle running. The sea otter was not just holding a food web together. It was running a carbon capture system that no engineer has ever come close to replicating. In 1977, the United States listed the southern sea otter as a threatened species under the Endangered Species Act. It was, by that point, one of the most studied animals in American conservation history, and one of the most endangered. Recovery efforts began slowly. No-take zones were established along the California coast. Monterey Bay Aquarium started rehabilitating stranded otters and returning them to the wild. Scientists tracked population movements, documenting the slow changes in the ecosystem wherever otters returned. Progress was measured in decades, not years. In 1985, a small group was translocated to San Nicolas Island off Ventura County, an attempt to establish a second population as insurance against an oil spill or disease. It did not fully take. The San Nicolas population struggled, but the mainland population grew. Slowly, the otters moved north, into Monterey Bay, into the waters off Santa Cruz. And wherever they went, researchers documented something they had predicted, but still found remarkable to actually see. The kelp came back. Not everywhere, not all at once, but in patches, in coves, along stretches of coast where urchin barrens had been total, the kelp began to reestablish. Fish returned. Bird populations increased. The arch, slowly, imperfectly, began to reassemble itself.
Today, the southern sea otter population stands at roughly 3,000 animals. It is the largest it has been since commercial hunting ended. The kelp forests are returning along the California coast. Monterey Bay now supports one of the most studied marine ecosystems on the West Coast. 3,000 sounds like a success, but the historic population was 300,000. Fully restoring the kelp forest would require a population 10 times larger than today. 10 times. And there are new pressures. Shark predation has increased. Harmful algal blooms kill otters and their prey. Sea surface temperatures are rising, stressing the kelp independently of urchin grazing. The ecosystem is not simply waiting to be restored. It is changing underneath the restoration effort. What the sea otter story reveals is that ecosystems are not collections of species. They are architectures, structures held together by specific relationships, specific animals doing specific jobs that nothing else can replicate. Remove the right piece and the whole thing falls. Put it back and the rebuilding begins. Slowly, imperfectly, not always on our timeline, but it begins.